So, dear colleagues, I would mainly proceed with the topics that were presented before by Alexander Gusev and Elena Verbitskaya, because we, as a company, and I represent Start on Docs, we are not collecting data, but we are processing the data. We analyze the data from the very beginning, starting from 2016, actually. We were specializing on analysis of the data and most complicated situations with the data. That is why it logically happens that we talked a lot how data is collected, how the data is analyzed. Now we reach the point when it's high time to analyze the data. So from the point of analysis, the data of the real clinical practice represents actually quite a complicated task for the statistician, but actually it should be under the control of clinicians. So this topic has already been raised. So now clinical content is very important. I will explain you why. So if we refer to the definition of RWD in Eurasian Economic Union, well, we have the same very wide definition. So these are data from different sources. But if we refer to FDA presentation of 2016, we will see that actually a lot of information in that presentation, and I'm not going to quote FDA completely, but actually they say a lot on how real-world data could be used in the collection of information, in the interventional studies, in truly clinical pragmatic studies, and also in the observational and register-based studies that we mentioned today as well. But if you look at the definition wider, both EU and FDA, so we understand that we have the data of the trial, but also we have the system of the healthcare. Alexander spoke about it, and quality of electronic records. So we actually know quite a lot from experience about them. We understand that it may not be full data and it may not be valid data. And from the point of statistician, as it was said before, we see the weight of the patient of 5 tons. That means data is not complete. So that means when we remove non-valid data, so not accessible data, we actually are left with very limited pool of information that is to be processed. Then we face why data is not valid. Probably it's more important than the fact that it's not valid. So the question is why. So actually, we don't have the data of insurance companies because in the United States, they are sharing with investigators very actively, but we don't have this source of information. Well, at least we start, and we are getting this data from the hospitals and outpatient centers, from medical records also. We also have some positive experience for the last 2 years. This is data from medical and portable devices, accessories, so continuous glucose monitoring, tonometers, smartphones, smartwatches, so they're all sources of medical information. So we actually keep information in social networks because this is not structured information that should be processed with neural nets. We should find domains here. So this is not direct information. This is already processed information. But as you see here on the slide, each of the sources can be characterized with a different level of structurization and the different level of completeness of information. In order to process the data of real clinical practice, we need to assess the specificity of each sources of data, whether it gives us completeness or not. For example, we have the database from Federal Lab, let's say, very big lab chain. So I'm not naming so, but there are several chains like this. And definitely we believe that this is complete. And all the data which is there, it's in the lab. Unlike medical records of the patients in the hospitals, laboratory data can go there or maybe not. So what patient gives us is limited with what he or she filled in because they could do it or they couldn't because some information could be missing, both in diary and in the portable accessory. So the reasons why is it absence? It could be accidental, well, simply forgot to introduce the data, both doctor and the patient, or it could be intentional. In American publications, they frequently say that depending on the type of insurance, The doctors may introduce extra information to get additional compensation, or they can hide information, and then patient would not go beyond the borderline of the insurance. So in America, it's all that regulated by the financial story of insurance. So what was not mentioned today is that when we work with medical information, which is coming in the real practice, normally we have multiple sources of data. So this is the same data that could exist in several options. They could be presented here, there, and somewhere else. Also, we need to assess the completeness and uniqueness of the data identification, then methodology of what we confirm that, let's say, the data is absent and we cannot find it, then to do the sensitivity analysis, and most important, interpretation of the results versus targets, because sometimes there could be a situation when we do the analysis in some subgroup, and this subgroup appear to be actually for patients. Unfortunately, in this case, we need to change the task because this is not sufficient data in this subgroup. And all that should be properly described in statistical language, in the procedure that would be very transparent and very reproducible. If the other statistician will do it, he will get the same results. If the procedure is not reproducible, that means it's not valid. Data of real practice, initially, they're not focused on the resolution of the specific scientific tasks, and the biggest problem is non-structured data, which is presented as a text. It is very clear that neural nets allow to identify some elements of text and then structure them, but sometimes it can happen that the text is not structured at all, that you have to check it manually, and the biggest problem here is not complete data. And now we approach the most important. We speak a lot about this data. Pressure, glucose, diagnosis, yes or no. But you see, we have so much meta information associated to that. We can match it with one specific patient, with one specific time point, at what moment patient had this or that intervention, then source of the data. What is the source? What is the original source of the data? Also, has it already been found, or maybe we should find links with other data sources, and clinical context. What group this patient belongs to with all this set of data. Concomitant treatment, what are the risks? What is the initial risk? What will be the risk in the future? So all that is a clinical context. So this is characteristic of the population where a patient is in. So all this meta information should be counted when we carry out the analysis. And I will start with the uniqueness of data. You see multiple sources here. What is the primary source? Where initially this information was presented? What we can count? If sources are mismatching in between, what we believe to be the only correct one. How we understand that it is the same? And what if it is the wrong date? We believe that there were two tests with the same results, but in fact, the same test, but the date is wrong. How do we identify? Can we, in the medical records or in the laboratory information system, from there, can we understand that this is the same patient? How unique is this identifier, ID information? Because in big databases, you can see people with the same names and same date of birth. Can identifiers be converted into each other? Again, the issue of identification and the completeness of meta information. Matching of data. What would be the mismatch? Different volume of information and different sources. In one source, they say patient has not medical history, but the other one says that there was a cancer and the surgery. What to believe? Contradictory data. For example, there is a male gender and positive pregnancy test. Contradiction metadata, different dates, different results. And we have to tackle with all that when we analyze, although we make the data clean. via different ways, using AI or manually or automatically. But statisticians, they still face these problems, and we have to have a very clear scheme. And meta-information would be absolutely complete. Otherwise, the completeness is lost. Well, if this is non-matching data, so if this is laboratory data, we first go to the lab. Then we attach category of validity. If information goes there automatically, there is no human factor, then we can say that this data is valid and there is no non-compliance, and we compare everything with that. But it's not always the case. It's good if we have the third sort of arbitrary source where we can compare it with. If we see in multiple sources that the patient is male, let's say, and there is an examination of male urinary tract, so probably pregnancy test is a mistake. And not completeness of data. This is the absence of data, plus the mechanism or the reason that could explain this insufficiency of data, this incompleteness, and these are things which are connected in between. The absence itself and the reason of absence. With portable devices, we face the same situation. So there is a system of continuous glucose monitoring, CGM. Everybody believes it's really continuous, but the patient is not linked to the system. Let's say patient took away the bracelet, but he's on business trip and there is no replacement. Or let's say he didn't switch it on until he eats the cake. And then I normalize the glucose and then I continue. So this is not accidental reason of absence of data. Patients or simply people, healthy people, they can use bracelets and they can use them when it's convenient. When we analyze just the existing information, it may look that he's very active, but he switches on the bracelet only once, and the rest of the day stays on the sofa. Well, this is aggravating examples, but you need to understand that information that comes for the patients, we cannot provide it 100% of time, continuously. And the factor of absence of data could be also very important for the interpretation of the results and for the clinical context. Yes, the separate follow-up could be absent or separate parameter, and you should have different attitude to that. If we don't get the data for the whole patients, well, normally this is higher level of loss than one parameter, although for that we have some methods how to replenish. So statistical methods, please appreciate, we don't always go for the replenish. Sometimes we say that, well, the absence of data is also important as a presence, and we analyze the absence data here. For us, it is also very important. So how long patients was not monitoring his or her glucose? I'm not diving deep into the statistics because this is quite a review presentation, but again, but sometimes data is absent accidentally or maybe intentionally. And if it is intentional, then there could be a very different approach how to restore the data. And this is what we need to know, how to actually supply and compensate the data. So here on the slide, I provide the methods of replenishing for different situations.
Подходят для разных паттернов отсутствия данных. На пропущенных слайдах вы можете потом посмотреть, слайды будут доступны, вы можете посмотреть примеры публикаций, где восполняли...
So you can look at the examples in the publications where you see different patterns of absence of data, intentional and non-intentional, and both is of great interest and great challenge. So wrapping up, as my time is over, I have to follow. So statistical analysis is important here.
статистик, например, без медицинского образования, может вообще не понять, о чем ему говорит отсутствие данных. Поэтому здесь предъявляются особые и очень, получается, строгие требования к тому, как анализ будет проведен. Коллеги, спасибо за внимание.